The Art of Lucid Dreaming. Episode 2. Photographs, text, and podcast created by Jack Lamb. Copyright 2026 John S. Lamb, all rights reserved. Observations about the nature of consciousness. Bridging waking and dream realities. All that we see or seem is but a dream within a dream. Edgar Allan Poe. Nearly 4,000 years ago, the progenitor culture in Mesoamerica, the Olmec, inhabited the impenetrable rainforests along the southern Gulf Coast of what is today Mexico. While the Olmec considered all creatures to be sacred, they primarily worshipped crocodiles, serpents, eagles, and jaguars, the creatures their shamans regularly transformed into at will. Using psychotropic substances and an experiential familiarity with an ancient ability today referred to as lucid dreaming, Olmec shamans transformed into animals through a historically acknowledged process generically known as therianthropy. This arcane ability to shapeshift into animals is the very same ostensibly legendary facility which once engendered the lycanthropes of ancient Greek mythology, who were once said to transform into werewolves. Long before the advent of recorded history, shamans across the world employed hallucinogenic plants like the pipilts and scintly cited in the Florentine Codex, mushrooms in the Amanita and psilocybe genera, and peyote cactus to enter dream states wherein they could defy the laws of physical reality. These psychotropic biologics not only allowed shamans to transform into animals in their dreams, they permitted them to function fully aware while dreaming, so they might heal the sick or dying, or visit alternate realities. Olmec shaman shapeshifting into a were-serpent. Few extant Olmec artifacts portray the transformation of men into animals. So the intriguingly singular basalt carving sculpted in exquisite detail, portraying an Olmec shaman transforming into a serpent, is unquestionably one of the most remarkable artifacts ever unearthed in Mesoamerica. In essence, it portrays a shaman wearing a serpent headdress and inhaling hallucinogenic incense, transmogrifying into the form of a snake, with his legs essentially transmuting into the tail end of the enormous serpent encircling him. This carving is the oldest representation of the plumed serpent thus far discovered in Mesoamerica. The actualities experienced in our human dreams, whether psychotropically induced or not, offer viable exits from the sealed compartmentalization reality enforces on us when we are awake, unlocking access to ineffable alternate worlds liberated from the constraints binding us. With only a modicum of consciousness, we are existentially capable of experiencing innovative dream realities. And within lucid dreams experienced under the aegis of an enhanced consciousness, we can manipulate dream realities to realize any conceivable manifest intent. Therefore, whether we concede it or not, dreams are conduits to the alternate accessible actualities outside the restrictive limitations normal reality imposes on us. This observable truth clearly was self-evident to our historic progenitors, who considered dreams and the interpretation of those dreams regarding how they related to actual waking life reality, an integral aspect of human existentiality. Subsequently, dreams, lucid or otherwise, provided an important source of information whenever a conscious entity endeavored to determine the relative viability of one particular cognizant decision juxtaposed against another. Whereas waking life reality obdurately maintains an inflexible pattern of causality promulgating the stable persistence of the one-dimensional continuum of duration in change we call time, dreams provide access to infinite nexus points of decision unrestricted by temporality. Consequently, dreams allow us to follow every permutation delineating not only what is, but also what might have been, superpositioned within our multidimensional perspectivity. Existentially, both waking and dream realities encompass everything that is, has ever been, and perhaps ever will be. Perhaps the very same alternative realities we experience in our dreams. So who can say that this cornucopia of innovative conceptualizations, allowing us to impose our waking sense of temporality within our lucid dreams, is not already an extant viability within the unlimited variability of our relativistic world? Frederick Willem van Eden, psychiatrist. The term lucid dreaming applies to a dream in which the dreamer is consciously aware that he or she is dreaming, a phrase coined by the Dutch psychiatrist Frederick van Eden, 1860–1932. This psychoanalyst unequivocally advocated that the dreamer wields control over his participation within the dream by manipulating the experiences imagined in the empirical dream gestalt. Moreover, he tenaciously maintained that a lucid dream could be as realistic and vivid as ordinary reality. Carl Jung, Swiss psychiatrist and psychologist. The concept of lucid dreaming was not widely known when the Swiss psychotherapist Carl Jung, 1875 to 1961, first advanced his innovative hypotheses about the collective unconscious, dream analysis, and dream symbolization. Jung believed that while the personal unconscious remains categorically unique to each individual, the collective unconscious taps into a reservoir of archetypal memories. Therefore, while dreams may be comprised of direct reminiscences of people and places from personal experience, images dreamed may additionally represent archetypal remnants emanating from the deepest recesses of our genetic memories, existing within this Jungian collective unconscious. Concepts such as the anima and animus, the shadow, the great mother, and the wise old man represent motifs, which may vary a great deal without losing their instinctual symbolic pattern to provide momentous transition during cultural rites of passage. Jung believed these archetypes act as symbols of our unconscious attitudes in our dreams, in essence hidden from the conscious mind as autonomous manifestations perceived by a dreamer as personages existing outside of the self. What follows is an assortment of actual lucid dreams dreamt by the author over the past 50 years. Hopefully, in reading them, they will give my listeners some idea how to recognize lucid dreams of your own. Several somewhat short lucid dreams. I think what sometimes prevents me from recalling my lucid dreams are the outright bizarreness of many of them. One night I had trouble recalling a particularly odd dream when I awakened. And after attempting to refresh my memory 3 separate times, even then I almost lost all recollections of the dream after I arose from my bed. Dream lizard symbiotics. In this dream, I visited my brother who lived in a jungle reality based on lizard symbiotics. For example, he kept a compliant lizard in his dresser, which somehow magically kept clothes clean and fresh. And the woman who lived with him in the dream employed another lizard to produce water to wash dishes. For I witnessed the outsized reptile generate a sphere of humidity overhead, which coalesced into a cloud generating a tiny rainstorm precisely over the sink. All the lizards in his house were quite docile, and seemingly fully attuned to the symbiotic relationship they sustained with their human companions. I can assure you I have never read such a storyline, so I must assume my dreams are so far outside reality even I sometimes have trouble recollecting them. That said, it is considerably easier to awaken in an obviously aberrant dream, since the witnessed peculiarities regularly startle me into immediate consciousness. Dream repairing an alien power plant. I had another dream where I was working at a power generation plant in an Aboriginal alternate reality. Their technology was not solid state or even mechanical. Yet I understood how it should have functioned by consciously examining the alien intricacies of its apparencies, before subsequently reconstructing the broken components that rendered the plant barely operable many centuries ago. The creatures working at the power plant were not trained or even intelligent. Nevertheless, I found a pair of males astute enough to learn the assembly procedure I devised to keep the plant operational after I awakened. I rebuilt 6 or 7 of the components, which had failed generations ago, severely limiting their production of power. Urgently hastening to finish the task before I awakened, when an end-of-work whistle unexpectedly sounded, every worker immediately stopped working. When the laborers began leaving, I tried convincing them to remain long enough for me to finish the last few components so we could get them reinstalled, but they refused. I could have gotten the power plant working at 60% instead of the 30% it produced, but the dim-witted creatures seemed innately unable to deviate from their daily patterns of behavior long enough for me to teach them how to overhaul the components on their own. So, with a distinct sense of frustration, I watched their alien reality slowly dissolve when I forced myself awake. This dream possessed so much detail I actually had to assemble the components one after the other, minute by minute in real time. Thus, if what George Gurdjieff, the Greek-Armenian philosopher and mystic born in Russia in 1872 said about how few minutes the average person is conscious a day is true, then I persisted fully conscious for a prolonged duration in this dream. As this was the last in a series of working-class dreams I had been experiencing, it made me wonder if their intent was to practice focusing and strengthening my consciousness while submerged in a dream reality. Dream learning the way of the monk. Sometimes after I dream, none is striking enough to bring it to my awareness when I awaken. However, one night I had two lucid dreams that subsequently awakened me. In the first, I observed a novitiate friar attempting to follow Gurdjieff's way of the monk, and in the second, I was the monastic cleric attempting to follow the way of the monk based on my discerning observations surveyed in the first of this paired set of lucid dreams. The reason why I refer to these dreams as the way of the monk is that both visions involved the correct way to hold one's hands in prayer. Apparently, just holding my hands, palms together with elbows affixed at my sides as I learned as a child growing up Catholic, is improper. So in the dream, I had to practice holding my elbows out horizontally to each side, and perpendicular to palms vertically pressed together. With my unwavering dream instructor demanding I achieve perfection, the distressing position was extremely agonizing to maintain. As I think about this dream as I write, it prompts me to recall why I would never willingly live as a monk in a monastery. Dream, transcending to a quantum state. I am not sure why occasionally I cannot dream at all, although, it may be a consequence of spending so many hours working on one or another creative project. It overpowers my consciousness to the exclusion of all else. Nevertheless, I know my dreams will eventually resume, as they did on the night I oddly slept for over 8 hours. I faced a weekend gathering with a group comprised of 15 intellectual friends and their significant others. It seemed as if I was a 30-something, as was everyone else in the house. With so much discourse and energetic sharing going on around me, I knew this crowd would be able to understand the intricacies of quantum reality if I decided to share it with them. And in the blending of our spirits, aptitudes, and abilities, it seemed conceivable we might be able to open our collective consciousness to the wonders of the quantum universe for all to witness. For my part in preparing supper with all my friends, I sliced a large block of blue cheese that made my mouth water, until precipitously I realized I should be preparing my presentation so its central points about reality would make sense to everyone. Then as I began rehearsing what I wanted to say, I found myself unexpectedly merging and meshing with the existentiality of the quantum universe, my consciousness entwining with the matter and energy whirling around me as I floated in black space, until time stopped and temporality no longer had meaning. As my last sentient thought in this dream, I realized I must have precipitately propelled my consciousness into the quantum universe before I had the occasion to share it with my collected friends through my presentation. But then, I realized they orbited around me, experiencing the same existentialism as me, apparently pulled along in the tow of my tide. What a remarkably transcendent dream. A world of wetness and ice. I had another alternate reality dream in which I lived on a frozen and wet, sparsely populated planet. Because nothing would combust in its atmosphere, the people were largely nomadic, journeying from one temporary thermal spout to another for the heat it provided them. The catch with living on this planet, we were always wet, and when the thermal geysers erratically receded, it was god-awful miserable to be cold and wet for days. I usually worked with two females, repairing pipes connected to the only enduring deep thermal wellspring from which steaming water pumped to a mammoth cavern housing a relatively small number of elites who controlled the civilization. While in the field, we conversed with the cavern base through comm devices. Oddly, everyone worshipped a person named Scott Strauss and treated him as a demigod. Males and females incessantly gossiped about him, as if his was the only notable life on a planet where survival engaged the sum of human consciousness. Near the end of the dream, my co-workers and I found a break in the main pipe where it followed the length of a narrow footbridge spanning a deep abyss. And so much boiling water ejected from the rupture, lacking additional pipe, it was impossible for the three of us to make repairs. We needed support, so one of my colleagues called the cavern. But before she could report, the person on the other end informed her aghast that Scott Strauss was a computer-generated construct and not a living person. Both the females working with me were so distraught over the news they collapsed to the ground and refused to get up. Suddenly the hot water spewing from the broken pipe turned ice cold, and I knew the perpetual heat source for the cavern had permanently cooled, thereby marking the inevitable end of civilization on this planet. Soaking wet and two teeth clatteringly cold to survive, I crumpled to the earth in despair beside my disconsolate coworkers. Dream lucidity through game design. One night, I found myself in a lengthy serial dream in which I helped a young game designer with the theory of computer gaming. Each time I dropped back asleep after I awakened, I found myself in a subsequent meeting with the young man listening to his theories. Our encounters spanned several months, with every dream rendered in exquisite detail, comprising every sense including touch. For example, while sitting on a couch watching the programmer's work and listening to the young designer, I even felt the cushions depress when he sat down next to me. Except for the peripheral cloudiness circumscribing my sight, I would have thought I persisted in my real life. The eighth or ninth time I was about to re-enter and reiterate the dream sequence, I halted half in wakefulness and half in dream, and proceeded to move back and forth, deeper into dream and back into wakeful reality to study the effect. Uncontestably, my consciousness transported elsewhere, but that somewhere was more akin to sitting at a table looking at a microscope, before looking into the microscope to distinguish the alternative reality revealed at the infinitesimal level on the microscope slide. Consequently, there was no change in physical place, rather I merely focused an alternative way on something existing extant within the same specious space. It proved to be a significant learning experience, perhaps instigated by the repetitive run-throughs I practiced, while entering and leaving the illusory reality of this lucid set of dreams. A weapon to fight oppression. I also vividly remember a lucid dream taking place in a desert devoid of nearly all vegetation. The population lived isolated from one another in gypsy-like carts, oddly always parked adjacent to piled straw placed in globular mangers, presumably for feeding whatever animal pulled the roofed tumbrils across the parched landscape. My task was to organize these people, who dressed in desert robes, against an unnamed oppressor. But try as I might, I had no success in getting anyone to speak to me, and every time I tried, he or she hurried away. After nightfall, a man unexpectedly appeared and led me to a man-made depression, a hollowed earthen cavity where people clustered around a spectral-robed sorceress. This portentous woman pulled me aside and revealed an elongated glowing crystalline shard, which she claimed held the power I would need to marshal the inhabitants of this desert world to fight against their oppressors. Suddenly, the woman felt a presence approaching out of the darkness encircling the isolated concavity in which we all stood. And before I could see anything concrete, a brilliant light erupted upwards from the crystalline shard in her hand, spreading outward in a conical parabolic arch to create an umbrella of brilliance over the circumference of the bowl, illuminating and revealing imprecise shapes, moving just beyond its indistinctly obscured perimeter. Perhaps too much happened too fast because I sensed myself receding from the dream, not in fear but in shock. As the dream dissipated, I awakened, only to wonder if I might have used the shard to free the people. Now a few longer lucid dreams. My dreams transformed during those years we lived at Singing Stones, becoming progressively further lucid, detailed and intricate with each passing month. Soon my bursts of lucidity experienced within dreams became epic in proportion as I learned to maneuver consciously within my dream realities, assessing the fit of my consciousness within my dream persona to limit the intent of my actions so each dream reality maintained the causal continuity I required to manifest persistent and tempered change. And henceforth, my lucid dreams became epic in proportion. As the next dream illustrates, sometimes dreams can seem dangerously bizarre. But if the dreamer can remain fearless when threatened by an insurmountable menace, it may provide a perfect opportunity to employ ostensibly magical extrasensory influence over the dream details by utilizing consciousness to warp and bend reality at will. I had a vivid dream that called into play most of what I learned during the course of my life to keep my balance and wits in the face of unexpected peril. Contrary to my nature, I found myself in a battle against a demon named Belial, one I engaged briefly while dreaming during the last months I lived at Singing Stones. An epic confrontation against a demon. In those bygone days before there was an internet, it was difficult to look up random data, so I never knew if this demon was a figment of my imagination, a historical credibility, or a demon spawned some priest or nun used to scare the bejesus out of little kids when I was young. Consequently, while writing this chronicle in the year 2013, I looked up Belial on Google and learned he is no less than one of the 4 crowned princes of hell, and a major demon in the Bible. Perversely, the name translates as worthless in ancient Hebrew. Nevertheless, if you look it up, you will learn that Belial is no minor manifestation of evil. I dreamed my real self into a walled fortress made of stone in the company of a group of men and women, also plucked here against their will. Listening to some of the others argue with one another, it was clear we all knew we were here to band together to fight Belial. However, as no one had any stomach for a confrontation, it looked as if procrastination would be the battle plan of the day. Everyone talked at once, demanding we find a way out of our stronghold, but from my earlier clash I knew Belial manipulated reality at will. Thus, the citadel itself was an illusion that likely would metamorph without warning. And from my recollections of my earlier encounter with the demon, I inherently knew any one of our contingent could be an illusion, or even an aspect of the fiend. Thus everything and everyone in this reality was suspect. One of the men pointed up at a break in the wall and yelled, "Look!" And as we all watched, the stone transformed into an aperture iris, and then an oblique breach to the outside. Looking through the gap, I saw a pair of crescent moons, one above the other in a black sky. As the man who spoke was suddenly pulled through the opening, the lower moon transformed into a gargoyle and enveloped him, and in an instant, both were gone. I admonished our company to stay away from the fracture and pull back. And as we gave our ground, the rupture changed back into a stone wall. Although no one spoke, we all knew our number was one less than it had been. Fearfully, everyone started looking for a way out and quickly wandered off in different directions. A great deal happened I only vaguely remember, not enough to make sense of it, but enough to know we were under attack. Soon or later, it is impossible to say which, I passed through two brightly lit courtyards with rectangular pools tightly packed with crocodiles with long jaws filled with sharp teeth. Sensing they would only attack if I showed fear, I stepped over them by maintaining my tranquility. Trust me, it was extremely more perilous than it sounds. Restricted portions of reality changed unexpectedly, sometimes outside my control and other times due to my willed response to the never-ending barrage of altered and aberrant actualities. Passages and tunnels unexpectedly appeared and disappeared, and people who were in the wrong place at the wrong time were never seen again. Alone, I made my way haltingly through the fortress, expecting Belial to attack without warning. To make the game of cat and mouse more stimulating, the devil spawn would have provided us with an outlet, but the chances of finding it were slim to none. So, as I searched through the morphing passages and rooms, it appeared likely I would eventually confront the demon head-on. The next courtyard was filled with a pride of jaguars lying and sitting against each other. And again, I made my way safely between them by not allowing my fear to manifest the negative reality I wanted to avoid. After a long stone passage, I entered a third courtyard with more jaguars off to my left. Something drew me to the wall on the right where I saw a protruding rectangular stone with a sharpened pyramidal end. Inspecting the protrusion, I saw numbers inscribed on its surface, and since there was no way to depress it with my hand, I moved it with my will. As the wall morphed into a nook and then a cavity, I heard a woman's voice I recognized behind me shout, "The numbers total 71. Distracted, I noticed two of the people trapped in this lucid dream standing beside me, and without thinking, I let them lead me out of the room. But as we entered the passageway just outside, I realized they were an illusory manifestation to divert me from the room with the transmutating wall, indicating it must be important. Pulling away from the illusions, I re-entered the room where a man in a jackal mask appeared, hooting strident animal cries to rile up the jaguars off to the left. Making use of the mutability of reality myself, I projected a wish for the incubus-like masked howler to be quieted, and two guards with spears suddenly appeared out of nowhere to forcibly drag him away, never to return. Alone now with the stirred-up jaguars, I returned to the wall with the odd projecting stone with the pyramidal point, and peered into a cave boring straight through the solid rock. Then unexpectedly without transition, I found myself unpredictably inside the cave mouth looking back into the room, which changed abruptly into a small glade at the edge of a forest wherein my deceased mother now stood. Awash with unadulterated joy, I ran over to embrace her, and as I touched her form, reality transformed again and I was alone in what looked like a laundry room full of piles of clothes and bed sheets. Now, completely off balance by the rapid change in reality, I twirled around in dread expecting to confront Belial and awakened instead. Belial added the potential element of apprehension to the dream by threatening the obliteration of my spirit as well as my consciousness. And yet, despite the morphing realities while being hunted by a major hellspawn, I dealt with this situation without fear or emotion until the end. Fascinatingly, in the concluding scene when Belial manifests an illusion of my deceased mother, it provoked such a strong feeling of emotion I was unprotected and undone, and presumably lost. Hence the knowledge I take from this lucid dream is that not only must I be without fear when I die, I also have to be without compassionate sentiments either, for they may actually cloud my perception and distract my consciousness just when I most need to be focused. Ultimately, writing down my dreams seems to open access to possibilities I cannot otherwise see. Who is to say, at the instant of death we do not determine our fate in the nebulous dream world as the strictures of a fixed reality dissolve? Perhaps, giving in to the dissolution of despair when the physical body is no longer a part of us, triggers the life force animating our corporeality to re-enter the cosmic pool stripped of memories of what came before. But if I refuse to give in at the moment of my death, my consciousness ego ID might remain intact and persist, cognizant of my continuity. This possibility offers an optimistic confidence in the potentialities lying just beyond the opaque shroud of life, and may suggest a viable template to maintain my consciousness intact. It is possible to believe that all the past is but the beginning of a beginning, and all that is and has been is but the twilight of the dawn. It is possible to believe that all that the human mind has ever accomplished is but the dream before the awakening. H. G. Wells. The Guardians of the Common Reality. An odd happenstance began occurring the year before I sold our home at Singing Stones for the first time when the first in a series of 60 dreams intermittently dreamt over the next 25 years came to me in my sleep. In the first dream I found myself operating as a member of a squad. For the lack of a formal title I named the Guardians of the Common Reality. In the initial dream, a personage I came to identify as the commander ordered me to assist a group of superconscious life forms proficient at functioning within any alternate or aberrant reality. Since it was a dream, I willingly agreed, never fully comprehending I committed myself to a bizarre series of exceptionally cogent confrontational manifestations in a lucid dream, wherein I and 2 or 3 other conscious entities, not necessarily humanoid, were sent to squelch and repair reality rifts endangering the perpetuation of life in one of the universes assigned within our purview. In that first dream the commander taught me how to travel to a time and space in any universe in the multiverse by consciously willing myself to teleport to a mission marker he placed. Somehow, I presciently knew at this unfamiliar location there would be an out-of-control or overcharged uber-conscious being, either spewing random destruction or sucking reality into itself like a black hole. Once there, I was expected to do what I did best, that is to assimilate an immediate future happenstance to quiet the perturbations emanating from the threat. Or as a last resort, confine the unrestrained and unbridled entity in a shielded and impenetrable shell to limit his, her or its degree of destruction. Meanwhile, while I was so engaged, my associates would endeavor to repair the collateral damage to other proximate conscious entities unlucky enough to be within range of the outburst or inburst, by literally transpositioning time to resurrect the innocent victims in cases where recovery was possible. Most of my numerous missions concerned entities I cannot describe, even though I can distinctly see them in my recollection. For I do not have the vocabulary to describe their appearance or attributes. Nevertheless, I am able to relate an operation wherein the reality rift was spawned by a small group of iconoclasts in my own universe, dominated by an overlarge autocrat surrounded by bags of a psychotropic substance that he ate like bits of candy as fast as he could shovel the tablets into his mouth. In this lucid dream alongside 2 assigned colleagues, I materialized on a narrow street in what appeared to be a European village. Next, we climbed an outside stairway to a second-story flat where we simply passed through the wall to obtain entry. The room lay in disarray as the occupants were only just being sucked towards the metaphorical maw of the tyrant at its center, so we stopped the obliteration before any loss of life occurred. Empathizing with the plaintive dread the despot emitted to have so lost his desire to live, he intended to destroy reality in this universe. I readily assimilated him unconscious, for he truly wanted to escape his misery. Most times, the superconscious entities causing the reality rifts were not human or humanoid, so the spatial realities surrounding me were nearly impossible to comprehend. Consequently, I had to focus exclusively on dampening the sensed aberrant motility of the local reality, a characteristic unfailingly extant at the locus of every rift of destruction I witnessed. My work ended once I dampened the disruption, so fortunately I was not required to remain for cleanup. Otherwise, presumably the apparent peculiarities within these inexplicable universes might have adversely affected my awareness, no less than it did the collateral entities in the vicinity negatively affected by the being causing so much devastation. In all the occasions I found myself engaging in one of these lucid dream missions, I never tried to ascertain how the commander knew about the rifts in reality so rapidly. Or for that matter, what his true appearance or degree of dimensional transcendency might be, to be aware of so many universes simultaneously. But whatever he was, it certainly was well above the 7 levels of dimensional awareness I could intellectually comprehend. So, as far as I was concerned, I was relieved to be kept in the dark. And truthfully, from my perspective it was enough for me just to be bidden to the dance, even if I was unable to fathom how, what or where we danced. On 3 occasions, the entities I faced and the rifts they generated were more than I could handle. And the commander himself appeared in the flesh to deal with an overpowering threat. I qualify in the flesh because the human form he customarily projected for my perception intermittently metamorphed into an amorphous mistiness during the fray. And in one of these cases, the being we faced was more than the commander could constrain, so 2 more commander-like beings materialized to assist us in quelling the crazed entity causing so much destruction. That struggle persisted for so long I doubted I would survive. Still, even if I proved to be the weak link in our offensive and ultimately fell, I endeavored to warrant my failure could never be attributed to a lack of fortitude. Hence, I assiduously added my inadequate powers to the ostensibly all-powerful competencies of the triad of transcendent consciousnesses attending me, much like an ant might carry a grain of sand to help a team of monster bulldozers build a small mountain. Until such time as we repaired the rent in reality's fabric, and put that universe right again. I have no delusions that my 4-dimensional awareness was actually physically teleporting through the multiverse in a semblance of waking reality. But being well versed in the intricacies of all altered states of awareness, I know everything we experience consciously, even our dreams, are real if we believe them to be, shaped by perceptivity. So whether my guardian missions were simple dreams or credibly syncopated rhythms pulsating from a higher dimensional me persisting extant outside time, because they appeared real, their causal effect on my psyche was the same as anything occurring in my waking reality. In these illogical lucid dreams, I perceived the harsh understanding that each of us is but a suspension of disbelief away from a burnout analogous to what those out-of-control ultra-conscious entities in other disparate universes endured, if we are unprepared when we stumble on the true power of deific consciousness that is our legacy. 4. If we cannot exercise the restraint these godlike powers demand, then we could suffer a comparable fate and burnout. And like a Roman candle fizzling out after a fleeting flush of fiery ejaculation, or a falling star winking out after streaming a scorching trail across the night sky, we consume the sum of our lifespan's energies, which might have powered us through untold future wonderments of existentiality, in a transitory flash of abdication as our sentience expires. 2 hypnagogic lucid dreams. One night I had a lucid dream while still awake. I could easily have slept, but I stayed awake reading to limit the number of hours I waste sleeping. But by the time I went to bed, I caught a second wind and lay there waiting for thoughts racing through my mind to subside. Abruptly I realized I was looking down at a grid board symmetrically inlaid with a myriad of tiny objects arrayed in cells no larger than those found on a Parcheesi board, organized in 5-inch square grids of 8 rows by 8 columns. The cells were formed from multiple materials of various shapes, such as glass, crystal, metal, bone, and even flowers, all glowing in arrays of inimitably brilliant colors. I noticed when I looked at a specific cell it revolved at a rapid rate, while the objects in the cells adjacent twirled at a slower rate in the opposite direction. Comprehending I was fully conscious yet dreaming, on metaphorically taking an introspective step back to perceive the scene from a distinct perspective, it seemed clear that I lay awake in bed with the same progression of thoughts still running through my contemplations. Trying to maintain my delicate balance of awareness, with some difficulty I consciously brought the board of intriguing spinning objects into focus once more, while being aware of the stream of unquieted thoughts playing in my mind, on the one hand clearly immersed in a lucid dream and on the other, incontestably awake and abed in my ordinary reality. For a moment, in order to verify I persisted in two unique planes of existentiality synchronously, I purposefully ping-ponged my awareness between lying in my bed and my dream vision of the colorful objects gridded on the board. This time they were more difficult to resolve, seemingly as if I murkily observed them from a distance through a telephoto lens. Then at the instant I brought the spinning motions of a 3x3 subsection of the objects into a sharper resolution, the scene vanished entirely and my awareness snapped back to me lying in my bed awake. This fleeting dream was exceptionally informative for me. It suggested the possibility of dreaming awake, while still maintaining the tether of lucidity connecting the real world with the dream world. If this state of dual reality is reproducible, then lucid dream states might be more easily remembered with the clarity of wakefulness. Perchance because I had originally read about dreamwalking in the 1970s, I never heard of hypnagogic imagery until much later when I recounted this dream to a well-read friend who explained it to me. Consequently, while my brief and ephemeral cognitive visualization appeared to conform to the definition of hypnagogic, it surprised me this was the first time I experienced it. Thinking on it over the next several days, it seemed to me that sleep by definition requires a suspension of consciousness before it can occur, which would suggest reality must emanate from my own awareness rather than persist as an existing construct outside self. But then, how can I experience dreaming, which like tripping on a psychotropic substance, allows me for a limited time to exist in an unrestricted existentiality undefined by the limits normal reality imposes on us when we are awake? Still, why do I continually feel the landscapes within dreams are real and extant? Dreams as we know them are not true memories, unless they are unrecollected memories of other lives lived a la reincarnation. But as an author, I know even the greatest writers and movie directors in history cannot create completed documents and documentaries instantaneously as imaginings in the mind, for such creativity requires weeks or even months of painstaking progressive effort to be manifest. My main interest in re-entering dreams is to look for consistency. If dreams were random imagery occurring when we sleep, then they should be impossible to repeat. But if dreams exist extant on some plane in the quantum universe, then it indicates one's consciousness enters a static and consistent reality matrix. Thus, it is rational to assume that our dreams may occur in parallel or alternate realities, analogous to the brains proposed by theoretical physicists exploring string theory, extant within reality, but typically inaccessible to our waking consciousness. And even if it is only a memory of a dream I re-enter, are not recollections only the frames in the framework of real events we no longer animate with consciousness? Subsequently, the fact we can go back and run through dream scenes to embellish original sequences of events suggests dreams persist in a form no less real than a book we can page through again and again. Some years later, I was falling asleep while replaying Hawkwind's hard rock music album, In Search of Space, in my rapt recollection, when another hypnagogic dream involving static imagery unexpectedly transpired. The colorful photographic image of a curled-up baby painted on a dinner plate unexpectedly appeared before my eyes, quickly replaced by a series of white geometric three-dimensional shapes made of twisted wire suspended in midair against a shadowy gray background. Checking my metaphysical placement in reality, I could still hear Hawkwind playing in my mind, and I firmly felt my body lying in a bed, plainly, simultaneously still awake, and yet indisputably synchronously immersed in a dream. Hypnagogic dreams are weirdly real, indeed. Look for the next YouTube podcast episode of The Art of Lucid Dreaming. Episode 3.